So the first section that I wanted to cover for this semester is Impressionism. So Impressionism is from the 1870s to the 1880s. Now, something that's a little different from last semester is you can write down notes if you'd like. You'll have a couple of questions at the end that's just opinion based, but don't worry about having to memorize any dates, names, anything like that. So, Impressionism, popular in the 1870s and 1880s. So, some famous artists from this time period, but ones that I'm not going to really stick with a lot. Edgar Degas, so he specialized in the human form and what it would look like. In particular, moments in time. Specifically, he would do that with ballerinas. This one's done in chalk pastel. He would do paintings in oil, and all of them were studying these ballerinas. This was something new and a little different that he really enjoyed studying. A few years ago, something that was really cool is Misty Copeland, who's this very famous ballerina. She actually recreated a lot of these photos or these paintings for Harper Bazaar. So they got similar kind of costumes, similar poses. It was a really interesting photo shoot. Then you have Gustave Caillebotte. So notice that things are starting. They're still a little realistic, but they're starting to get a little less realistic as they go on. Like this, for example. So this is Camille Pissarro. So notice how everything's starting to become a little less, crystal clear. It's a little more painterly is what that's called. So the idea is that what these impressionist artists were doing is studying these moments in time at this specific time. So they would take their canvas and their palettes and set up in, a park, for example, like this, and paint these as quickly as they could to capture this moment in time, to capture how the light hit that tree, how the shadows were, where the people were standing, things like that. One of the more famous artists from this time period, this is Renoir. So same thing, he caught this moment in time, he caught these people, and this is actually this is one of the most valuable paintings in the world. 30 years ago, it sold for almost $80 million. Now, the big one that I want to focus on today is Claude Monet. So he's kind of the father of Impressionism. So his first big painting that kind of kicked this off was called Impression Sunrise, which is this. So notice how you can see every brush stroke. It's not smooth. It doesn't look like the Mona Lisa's skin that looks like porcelain. It's all kind of rough and quick. And this was from his house that we'll talk about in just a few minutes. But notice how everything has these kind of bright colors, painterly textures. And these are some of the most valuable paintings in the world. Most of these are worth $50 to $100 million each. This is from his home garden. This is his wife and child. And something interesting that he did is he experimented with taking one particular subject and painting it over and over and over, sometimes within one day, sometimes over the course of a week. So, for example, he took these poplar trees and he wanted to look at what did they look like throughout the day. So when the light was starting to go down, how are the shadows hitting it? He also did that with these haystacks. So kind of focusing on what the different seasons did to them. And then he also did this with these cathedrals. So this is the same cathedral from the same perspective, but during 4 different times of the day. This is his wife. He painted her as she was passing away. Now, one of his biggest sources of inspiration is Giverny. So that's his house. So it's located in France. Like I said, it's one of his greatest sources of inspiration. It's a really big tourist attraction now. It's a very beautiful place to go to. And here's a photo of him back when he was alive. So you can tell that, things still look pretty similar to when he was around. The most famous part of his property is probably his pond. He did a lot of paintings of these. And there's different art museums across the world that have some of these. For example, this one is at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, and they have a whole room dedicated to just this. Then you have his Japanese bridge, which is also a big piece of his property. Now, this is something that I thought was very interesting is he took his Japanese bridge as a source of inspiration for a lot of his paintings. Now, something that happened during his time is he started to develop cataracts in his eyes and he started to go blind. So this is when his eyesight was perfectly fine. And this is when it started getting a little rougher, but you could still tell that's a bridge. A little rough. And then this is when he was almost completely blind. So he said that these were the colors that he saw when he looked at the bridge. Next person is Mary Cassatt. So she's probably one of the most famous female artists of all time. So she did a lot of self portraits and she focused a lot on women with their children. And she's one of the few American artists that actually went to Europe to study Impressionism and to be involved in that time. So notice how you have little, you can still see the texture inside each of the designs on these chairs. And this is a really good example. So notice how you can still tell that that's a kitten, but notice how rough all these lines are. She also, like Degas, the guy who did the ballerinas, she would do a lot of chalk pastel studies. So these are quick. She's usually trying to get these down as quickly as possible so that she can take these drawings back to her house and make them into paintings. And she also started incorporating some Japanese printmaking influence, so with the background design. These are more quick studies. Next person, Rodin. So he's a French sculptor. He mostly worked with plaster cast into bronze. That's his most famous piece, is the Thinker. Now this is where his controversy kind of comes in a little bit. If you notice, this is him standing here in his suit, and he has all of his workers actually making the art. So he did design it, but he didn't make it. And a lot of people think that that's unfair and that he should kind of give credit to all of the people that work with him. So this is one of his big pieces, The Gates of Hell. So this depicts a scene from the Inferno, the first section of Dante, from the Divine Comedy. He was hired to make this door, and he told them when he was hired that it would take him about 5 years. He kept working on it and working on it. You can see there's pieces of like the Thinker and other sculptures of his. And it ended up taking him 37 years to complete this. And something else that he really liked to focus on was how would his sculptures, so his bronze sculptures, look outside with the weather beating down on it. And you can kind of see how it starts to change colors. All right, now on to music. Probably the most famous composer during this time period is Claude Debussy. I put a YouTube link on there. If you don't know his music, you definitely do know his music. You just might not know his name. but he's also an impressionist. His compositions are more chordal. He seems to create a mere impression of a composition, and then he really uses nature as his source for his inspiration. Other famous composers, Ravel. Again, I have links on there if you would like to listen to these. And that is it.